I can't help feeling that the stories you get toward the end of Shakespeare's career, as in The Winter's Tale, of a wife whom the husband has in effect killed by accusing her of something she didn't do. Hermione appears to die. She turns up again at the end of the play as a statue who comes to life, and she's aged miraculously over that period. Of course, that's because it really is Hermione, not a statue. But the Pygmalion image is of somehow a wife one has abandoned and destroyed, who comes back, and there she is, older by the period of time that has passed, so that she's wrinkled, but she's still beautiful, and you're able to love her, and you love her again. And if that isn't glancing at a story that's connected to Shakespeare's own experience with going back to Stratford, I would just be very surprised. This is entirely speculative, but it makes sense. I'm inclined to take a sad view of it and wonder if it really worked, but I think Shakespeare is there fantasizing a successful return to an aging Anne Hathaway. Now there's a nice connection to the life, it seems to me. Very speculative, but it's one that appeals to me.
There seems to be a neurotic emotional need on the part of many people to believe in conspiracies based on almost nothing. I've read recently there is now a second bullet theory in connection with the death of Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. They don't have a grassy knoll yet, but that will, of course, be coming. And I think now it is pretty clear that Marilyn Monroe was murdered by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. But I'm just kidding. You have to believe in an incredible conspiracy to believe the Oxfordian claims.
We know so much about Shakespeare if we could just get rid of prejudices and take him out of the academicians' hands. He was a man of the theater. Proof positive. Dear Lord, let's face this. Ignore everything I've said. This we cannot ignore. He didn't do anything about those plays in terms of heredity. Ben Jonson did. And if it hadn't been for his two friends, Hemmings and Condell, 7 years after his death, 1623, if it hadn't been for these gentlemen, we would never have known. Now don't tell me that a Bacon or a De Vere or all these other folks who come claiming that someone else wrote those plays would have done that and say that, well, it was because they wanted to hide the fact that they'd done it. They didn't want people to know. Shakespeare just it didn't matter. They were hits. They were played. They had long runs.
They say, who cares who wrote the plays? The evidence is enough. The plays themselves are sufficient in themselves, and indeed they are. But from my point of view, I usually tell my students when they are listening to music that you owe it to the composer to know a little bit about the man himself who wrote this music. It would not be here unless we had a composer who did have the ability to write.
To me, it's easier to really believe in the plays and in their message and empathize with the ideas if you have a conception that there's a man that you know something about who was the author.
The moot court on the question of Shakespeare versus Oxford, held in the presence of 3 Supreme Court justices in 1987, was, I think, an extraordinary historical event in the whole authorship question. Although they said the case was, as they say in a Scottish court, not proved, they had not made the case for Oxford against Stratford. Nevertheless, there seemed to be a concurrence among the 3 justices that it was an open question. One of the justices said it's a question for scholars, not for the courts, which is absolutely true.
You've got a little problem if you're the lawyer for that plaintiff, Edward de Vere. What do you do? Well, there's a very good technique. The French call it la poudre aux yeux, dust in the eyes. You stand in front of the jury box and you throw up dust storms, hoping there'll be enough dust so that the jury will not see things terribly clearly.
But he's always writing, there's an excellent French phrase, de haut en bas, he is looking down at it and he says, well, well, well. And he's perfectly wonderful at it, especially when he's dealing with enlisted men. They are just marvels. But he isn't one of the enlisted men.
So he has the common touch, but at the same time, he's quite clearly the nobleman.
He clearly is not an aristocrat.
Aristocratic as they come.
Those plays were written by an aristocrat.
Shakespeare certainly became very successful, what he did. So he knew about success, he knew about frustration.
He's not a condemner of mankind, he's a condemner of evil. And he's able to draw that distinction. And that, to me, is the mark of not just a great artist, but a great philosopher. And I think that's the reason why actors love to recreate his characters and why audiences love to see his plays again and again.
And you very rarely find a villain who is so far gone in villainous to be utterly repulsive, and of course his heroes too show their weaknesses, whether Julius Caesar, Hamlet, and so on.
His plays are filled with people who are other than they seem to be.
What I delight in about Shakespeare is that even his villains are human. And he will often do that by endowing them with a great sense of humor, like Richard III or Edmund.
That's what makes Shakespeare so great, because his things are timeless, and also because he writes up things are always written in terms of varying shades of grey, which is the colour in which things are painted in life.
I think he felt that in a much deeper way than many of us have. But we learn from that and grow through it by realizing that he suffered also.
And of course it has to be admitted, I think, that sometimes certain Oxfordians or Baconians or Marlovians, perhaps for that matter, but certainly Oxfordians, have taken the thing up in the spirit of a religious crusade, which it is not, or shouldn't be. It is a purely intellectual question. And the emotion should be left out of these things, as they should ideally be left out of all attempts to solve the great problems of history.
Shakespeare loves that idea of theater as dream, kind of Platonic illusion, which of course in some ways is more real than our ordinary life, because the play goes on forever.
If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended. That you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme no more yielding but a dream, gentles do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck now to escape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long, else the Puck a liar call. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.